Welcome back. You made it through part one. You understand the foundations of slavery, the Middle Passage, how chattel slavery built America. Now we're going deeper. In part two, we're moving from foundations to the expansion and enforcement of white supremacy. We're going to show you exactly how slavery made America rich. We're going to explore what happened when America declared liberty while practicing chattel slavery. We're going to trace the Civil War, emancipation, Reconstruction, and the violent backlash that nearly destroyed what freedom had just begun. This is where you'll see the system at work. This is where you'll understand that white supremacy didn't end with slavery. It evolved. It got meaner. It got more organized. By the end of chapter 2, you'll understand why Jim Crow was created, how it was enforced, and why fear, pure unadulterated fear, that drove the entire system. Let's go. Slavery was not a side issue in American development. It was central to the growth of the United States. Enslaved labor generated enormous wealth that helped build banks, insurance companies, shipping industries, railroads, universities, textile industries, and agricultural economies. Cotton became one of America's most valuable exports during the 19th century. By the early 1800s, the invention of the cotton gin increased demand for enslaved labor dramatically. Millions of enslaved Africans were forced to work in brutal conditions across the Deep South. Northern industries also profited from chattel slavery. Northern banks financed plantations. Northern textile mills processed slave-grown cotton. Shipping companies transported goods tied to chattel slavery. Many prestigious American institutions benefited directly or indirectly from enslaved labor. The wealth generated through chattel slavery helped transform the United States into an emerging economic power. At the same time, enslaved Africans themselves received none of the wealth they created. Generations of black families were denied wages, land ownership, education, political power, and economic mobility. This created a racial wealth gap whose effects continue into modern America. If you want to understand exactly how slavery built American wealth, how banks, universities, and corporations directly profited from human bondage, read Empire of Cotton by Savin Beckert. This book traces the global cotton industry and exposes how slavery was not incidental to America's rise. It was central to it. You can find this book in our Black History Library at the link in the description. This is the economic history they don't teach in our school curriculum. Own it, understand it, know where American wealth came from. The American Revolution introduced powerful ideas about liberty, equality, and freedom, yet those ideas existed alongside chattel slavery. Colonists declared that all men are created equal, while hundreds of thousands of Africans remained enslaved. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. America was fighting for independence from British rule, while simultaneously denying freedom to an entire race of people within its borders. During the Revolutionary War, Black Americans found themselves in a difficult position. Some enslaved Africans fought for the British because British officers promised freedom to those who escaped colonial slaveholders and joined their side. Others fought for the American colonies, believing that if America gained independence, the ideas of liberty and equality might eventually apply to them as well. Despite Black participation in the war, the reality after the Revolution remained deeply unequal. Some northern states began gradually abolishing slavery, but slavery expanded further throughout the South. The invention of a new nation did not end the institution of human bondage. Instead, slavery became increasingly tied to the economic future of the United States. The United States Constitution itself reflected compromise over slavery. These compromises included the Three-Fifth Compromise, the Fugitive Slave Clause, and temporary protection of the international slave trade. These provisions strengthened the political influence of slave-holding states and embedded slavery into the structure of the new government. Free black communities slowly emerged in parts of the North, but racism remained widespread throughout the nation. Even in places where slavery ended, black Americans faced segregation, economic discrimination, restrictions on voting, social exclusion, and violence. The American Revolution expanded democracy primarily for white men, while black Americans remained largely excluded from the promise of freedom and equality. As America expanded westward during the 1800s, tensions over chattel slavery intensified. The question of whether new territories would allow chattel slavery threatened to divide the nation politically, economically, and morally. Abolitionists increasingly condemned slavery as immoral and inhumane. At the same time, enslaved Africans resisted through rebellions, escapes, sabotage, self-education, and everyday acts of survival. Resistance to slavery was constant. Prominent figures emerged in the anti-slavery struggle, including Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Nat Turner. These individuals exposed the brutality of chattel slavery and challenged America to confront its contradictions. At the same time, Southern political leaders defended chattel slavery aggressively. Many argued that slavery was necessary for the agricultural economy, social stability, political power, and white supremacy. Fear also played a major role in the South's defense of chattel slavery. Many white Southerners feared things such as slave revolts, economic collapse, loss of political control, racial equality, and the end of white dominance. The expansion of slavery into the Western territories became a national crisis. Political compromises repeatedly delayed conflict, but the nation became increasingly divided. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 triggered Southern secession. Southern states feared Lincoln's opposition to the expansion of slavery would threaten the institution entirely. Several Southern states left the Union and formed the Confederacy, largely to preserve chattel slavery and maintain the racial hierarchy that supported Southern society. The Civil War officially began in 1861. The Civil War became the bloodiest conflict in American history. Although the war initially centered on preserving the Union, chattel slavery quickly became central to the conflict. The moral, political, and economic contradictions surrounding chattel slavery could no longer be avoided. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate-controlled territories were free. While the Emancipation Proclamation did not immediately free all the enslaved people, it transformed the war into a battle over slavery itself. Black Americans played a major role in securing victory for the Union. Approximately 180,000 black men served in the Union Army despite facing discrimination, unequal pay, dangerous assignments, and racism from some white soldiers and officers. Their participation challenged racist assumptions about black inferiority and demonstrated a black commitment to freedom and citizenship. The Civil War ended in 1865 with a Union victory. Soon afterwards, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States except as punishment for a crime. However, emancipation did not bring true equality. Formerly enslaved people emerged from slavery with little protection, few resources, and enormous obstacles. They sought education, land ownership, family reunification, political participation, and economic independence. White resistance emerged almost immediately. Many white Americans feared losing racial dominance and economic control. Former slave-holding elites sought ways to maintain power even after slavery ended. Organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan formed to terrorize black communities through violence, intimidation, and murder. The end of slavery did not end the ideology of white superiority. Instead, that ideology evolved into new systems designed to maintain racial control. To understand what it was like to be enslaved and then suddenly freed, to understand the hopes, the dreams, and the devastating barriers formerly enslaved people face, read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. This book traces Black American history from Africa through emancipation and shows the resilience of our people against impossible odds. You can find this book in our Black History Library at the link in the description. This is the foundation book. This is where you start if you want to truly understand American history. Reconstruction was the period following the Civil War, during which America attempted to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society as citizens. For a brief moment, America experienced one of the most transformative democratic periods in its history. During Reconstruction, Black men voted. Black Americans held political office. Black schools and churches expanded. Black businesses and communities grew. Constitutional protections were established. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to formerly enslaved people. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying voting rights based on race. For the first time in American history, interracial democracy appeared possible. However, many white Southerners viewed Black political participation as a direct threat to white control. Violence intensified throughout the South. White supremacist organizations launched campaigns of terror aimed at destroying Reconstruction. These groups attacked Black voters, Black elected officials, Black schools, Black churches, and white allies who supported equality. Northern political support for Reconstruction gradually weakened. Many white Northerners lost interest in protecting Black rights, especially as political compromise became more important than racial justice. In 1877, federal troops were withdrawn from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. This decision allowed Southern states to regain control and opened the door for the rise of Jim Crow segregation. Following the end of Reconstruction in 1877, Southern states quickly moved to reestablish white political and social control. With the federal troops withdrawn and Reconstruction protections weakened, state governments created a system of laws, customs, and violence designed to limit the rights and freedoms of Black Americans. This system became known as Jim Crow. The term Jim Crow originated from racist minstrel performances in the early 1800s in which white performers used blackface to mock Black people. Over time, the phrase became associated with the legal and social system of racial segregation that spread throughout America. Jim Crow did not emerge overnight. It developed gradually as white political leaders sought to reverse many of the gains Black Americans had achieved during Reconstruction. Southern lawmakers introduced policies designed to remove Black citizens from political life and restore white dominance. These policies included segregated schools, separate transportation systems, restrictions on voting rights, employment discrimination, housing segregation, and laws prohibiting interracial marriage. Voting restrictions became one of the most powerful tools used to suppress Black political participation. Southern states created poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and complicated registration requirements that disproportionately targeted black voters while allowing many poor white voters exemptions. Violence also played a central role in enforcing Jim Crow. White supremacist organizations and mobs used intimidations, beatings, lynchings, and economic retaliation against black communities that challenged racial hierarchies. These acts of terror reinforced segregation beyond what laws alone could accomplish. We've covered the enrichment of America through chattel slavery. We've seen the contradiction of the American Revolution. We've watched the Civil War unfold. We examined the Reconstruction and the brief moment when Black Americans held political power. And we've seen what happened next. The violent backlash, the Ku Klux Klan, the terror, the determination to restore white control no matter the cost. But here's what comes next in part 3. And this is critical. This is not the end. We have to discuss Jim Crow. We still need to show you how segregation became law. We still have to examine the fear and hatred behind white supremacy. We still have to trace the civil rights movement and how the ideology evolved into 2026. Part 3 is the final piece. It's where you see how the system transformed from chattel slavery into Jim Crow into modern inequality. It's where everything connects. You need part 3. Don't skip it. Subscribe. Now, next week, we're going to be doing a video on Juneteenth, and we're going to do a small part about the opening of the President Barack Obama Presidential Library. You know I got to be there for that. But after that, the following week, we're dropping the final part of this series, and it's going to show you exactly why America looks the way it does in 2026. I'll see you at the video.